Oscar season continues this week on Hell of a Picture with the 1955 Best Picture winner, On the Waterfront. Dave opens up the show this week by talking about the film's director, Elia Kazan, and how art imitates life in the film, while I tell you about Marlon Brando's performance and the emergence of American realism in cinema. We talk about the movie's veneration of the truth, original sin, and the influence it had on Martin Scorsese. Don't be a pigeon, a rat, or a canary. Watch Hell of a Picture and be some kind of noble animal. I don't know, like a squirrel maybe? It's your call. That's this week on Hell of a Picture. Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film. And if it truly is a hell of a picture, my name is Andrew Bartlett. I'm sitting across the internet, as I do each and every week, from the Father Pete to my Terry Malloy, Mr. David Hollinshurst.
Father Pete, very good, very good.
Yeah, you're the voice of reason for me.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, okay, sage counsel and all and whatnot.
That's right.
Yeah. Certainly not a priestly figure, but maybe Jason Priestley. Now, Jason Priestley, yes, very. Oh man, 90210. Forget about it. Love
90210.
Love.
Love that. Yeah, Beverly Hills, man. I make that Father Pete reference Terry Malloy because we're doing On the Waterfront this week. We continue our Oscar run with a Best Picture from the 50s, from 1954, On the Waterfront. This is a banger of a movie, and it's our second Oscar picture. We did Casablanca last week, which we deemed a hell of a picture, obviously. And we're on to On the Waterfront. This was a movie I've watched a good few times. It's been a couple of years, but I got the Criterion Collection on Blu-ray, and I finally got to crack it open and look at a bunch of this bonus features and stuff on that. So that was fun, which we'll get into. And this was the first time for you watching it, right, Dave?
First time for me. Yeah, absolutely. Had heard about it, of course. Had been made aware by references in pop culture, just by the overwhelming influence of the film. Obviously, we touched on it when we talked about Raging Bull. So there was a certain familiarity, but didn't know anything really about the plot other than the fact that he was a boxer at some point. I thought it was going to be a little more boxing heavy, truth be told, but no, it was going in fresh pretty much.
Little to no boxing in the film. I guess there's a couple fights, but that's about it. There's no street fights at that. No actual in-ring stuff.
No,
would have been interesting.
No, and certainly lacks the choreography the balletic sort of fight choreography that you see in later pictures. But it was of its time, and it wasn't really that important to the movie, so it didn't matter that it was a little ungainly, the fight scenes.
That's right.
It's almost reminiscent of De Niro in The Irishman when he's beating the crap out of that guy out front of the bakery. Yeah, it's very very suspect.
That's right. All right, so let's. We got a lot to get into. This is a very complicated movie and revered and lots of kind of stuff around the film as well, which we want to get into. So, Dave, why don't you start us off as you do each week with the rundown to catch people up on the Waterfront.
on the Waterfront, yes, I will. So, Terry Malloy could have been somebody, but as it stands, he's not. Terry, a one-time aspirant to boxing greatness, is now a stevedore who runs errands on the side for Johnny Friendly, the mob boss who runs the Waterfront. Now, after one such errand makes him complicit in the death of a fellow dock worker, Terry must confront the truth of his actions and decide where he will stand in the struggle for the fate of his union and his soul. On the Waterfront was released in 1954 and directed by Elia Kazan. It stars, of course, Marlon Brando as Terry Malloy, Eva Marie Saint, not Saint Marie, weirdly enough, as Edie Doyle, Carl Malden as Father Pete, Rob Steger as Charlie Malloy, and Lee J. Cobb as Johnny Friendly. Now, this film was an absolute titan at the Academy Awards. It garnered 12 nominations and securing 8 of those as victories. Interesting asterisks must be applied to that number of 12, though, because the film was technically considered for 10 awards, totaling 12 nominations. 3 of its cast members, Lee Cobb, Carl Malden, and Rob Steger, were all nominated in the same category of Best Supporting Actor. Now, to the best of my perfunctory researching efforts, 3 is the highest number of actors from one movie to be nominated for the same award, and it's only happened a few times in history. Those being 1935's Mutiny on the Bounty, 54 on the Waterfront, of course, The Godfather in 72, and The Godfather Part 2 shortly thereafter in 74. Shockingly, it was only this final time that saw any of the 3 actors in any year actually win. De Niro would win Best Supporting Actor for The Godfather Part 2, making him the only winner from this very select group, which otherwise suffered from the curse of 3. And that is your rundown.
Well said. Yeah. God, 10, like 12 nominations.
Yeah.
That's wild. And like winning, just like winning like all the heavy hitters, right? Like the big ones. You know, that is quite an impressive feat for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a real testament to the ensemble cast. You know that people just they had to nominate. Like you couldn't spread it out. You felt compelled to nominate 3 people from the same movie, and obviously it's only happened a few times. Other instances of tremendous ensemble efforts. So it's a real laurel for the film to be recognized like that.
Yeah, and I guess that's why a lot of people think of this as such a important film when it comes to actors and acting in general. I mean, 5 acting nominations for the film. Essentially, the top 5 billed actors got nominations, and 2 of them won. So it really an important film when it comes to the acting, which we will get into. But let's start by let's talk about the director a little bit, Kazan. Fill some people in on you did some research on him, and he has a very interesting sort of, I want to say backstory, but just sort of career in general.
Yeah, an interesting figure to be sure, and this is sort of a line through from last week in Casablanca when we discussed HUAC and the House Committee on American Activities. And so this is a film largely about truth. And, that's really germane when you talk about the director. And so first of all, before getting to Hollywood, Kazan was already a success. That should be mentioned. He directed a number of Broadway plays, including a little production you might have heard of called Death of a Salesman, which, of course, he won a Tony for, and he would win several other Tonys there afterwards. He directed his first feature film in 1945, and so by the time we get to On the Waterfront 9 years later, he'd already been nominated for 2 Best Director Oscars, winning 1. So this guy has credentials. He's legit. But in 1952, he would appear as a friendly witness before HUAC, and there he would name names and have 8 of his friends and colleagues consigned to the blacklist. And Kazan would go on to work successfully thereafter. As we mentioned, he would do such films as A Streetcar Named Desire, East of Eden, America, America, Viva Zapata, and the list goes on. So what we have here is a movie that kind of celebrates The Informant, directed by an informant. And I wanted to put that out, in front here at the beginning of our discussion, because I think it provides vital color on the subject. Because knowing that the film could be viewed as kind of like an analogous autobiography, one that really does its best to not only absolve, but I would say venerate the lead character, Terry Malloy, and by extension, if you want to view it that way, its director, Elia Kazan.
Yeah, it's definitely conflicting in that sense. Like if it is actually allegorical, if it is about his life, or if it's not. But it's problematic. This sort of we've gone through this before about, can you separate the art from the artist, and or I guess Yeah, in this case, it definitely feels like a bit of a gray area with how people sort of have received him in the years since. But like Kazan he was a really a trailblazer in just the theater and film world. And in this film in particular, he sort of dives into this depiction of American realism, which hadn't been very prevalent in American film up to this point. Um, I think most notably is, Kazan is really considered an actor's director, like he really cares about the process for an actor. That's how I mentioned like the acting as being so important in this film. How he was able to draw, the performances out of all the actors, especially Brando, was really extraordinary.
Mm.
And it's created this authenticity and this realism uh, in the film. And people like to call it method. Like he had a role in sort of like developing the method style of acting, specifically on film. Um, but I think that term gets thrown around a lot, and I don't think people necessarily really understand what it means. It's really about being just like present in the now. You're not just memorizing lines. You're not just regurgitating. You're like actually creating this authenticity
Mm.
to go through, and it doesn't feel like you're watching acting. You're just actually watching sort of reality unfold.
Yeah, and I noticed that when I was watching this. Obviously, I don't have the sort of the inside track on that in the way that you would, but it did feel different from older films, just in that it wasn't as performative. It was more, as you say, like
Exactly.
there was a touch of
Exactly.
realism. And looking around, I saw that a lot of actors, Dustin Hoffman, he had a pretty notable quote saying that himself, Bob De Niro, Pacino, they wouldn't be what they are without Kazan and his influence. And that debate that you talked about, just how it's sort of gray and there's conflicting opinions on him. You can see that like that is the like the sort of the in the film there is a debate around truth, and you can hear that
Yeah.
debate in the real world surrounding Kazan. Because as you say, people are divided on him. For his own part, though, what he would say on this subject is, I would rather, excuse me, I would rather do what I did than crawl in front of a ritualistic left and lie the way those other comrades did and betray my own soul. I didn't betray it. I made a difficult decision. And he would go on to add, there's a normal sadness about hurting people, but I'd rather hurt them a little than hurt myself a lot. So that's a pretty interesting sort of. I don't know if it's a defense.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's what it is, but it's. I found it a pretty interesting sort of quote on the subject, and the industry, had things to say as well. Orson Welles, for one, was definitely not a fan.
Right.
He would say, Elia Kazan is a traitor. He is a man who sold to McCarthy all his companions at a time when he could continue to work in New York at a high salary. And having sold all his people to McCarthy, he then made a film called On the Waterfront, which was a celebration of The Informer. Wells would go on to say, I have to add, he is a very good director. So a nice little concession there at the end by Orson after totally lambasting him.
Yeah.
Other people are more forgiving. Like we mentioned, Scorsese and De Niro, they both love him. They honored him, in fact, at the '99 Oscars with a Lifetime Achievement Award. But the audience itself was kind of split. Some people stood and applauded. Other people sat, made a very a pointed statement by sitting and refusing to. Ed Harris, Ian McKellen didn't stand and applaud. I think but Meryl Streep and some others, they did stand. So the world is divided. Scorsese would actually end up directing a documentary called A Letter to Elia, which in which he credits him for being one of his inspirations in becoming a filmmaker. And we saw that in Raging Bull, I think, very clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he absolutely was just a massive influence on Scorsese. And I watched one of the documentaries on the Blu-ray where Scorsese talks about Kazan, and he says he like Scorsese had obviously like loved films growing up, but when he saw On the Waterfront, he equated it to being like his first time he experienced Hollywood. Like he wasn't watching Hollywood, he was experiencing it because it related so much to him. The
Mm.
film made sense, and he he got to see people that he would see in his neighborhood. Terry Malloy was just like a random guy that he would walk past every day, and it felt real and authentic. And
Yeah.
he had a quote in that documentary where he said, "I can't even think of it as a film anymore. It's more of a phenomenon." And that's, that was for Scorsese. Like, it was one of the greatest directors ever. And it's just like, he's kind of crediting this film to creating this sort of realism that he would go on to kind of use throughout his career.
Yeah, yeah, no, the influence is undeniable for sure. Like we said earlier, this is a film about truth, but not, I think, truth and lies, but rather truth and silence, of light
Mm.
and dark. And the mob is able to thrive here because people stay silent. And you hear that refrain of people learn to be D&D, as they say, deaf and dumb. Even though they hate the way the mob runs things, nobody testifies against them, partly because they don't want to get whacked, obviously, but there's a little more to it than that. There's this rule set of the waterfront that's not codified, but that everyone sort of subscribes to. It's almost like a law of nature, whereby, you know, yeah, like sort of like there's this bisection of the world that the film is making. There's civilized order and there's natural order, and the docks are run by that
Mm-hmm.
natural order, that law of nature, where the strong rule the weak, and they take what they want. And Terry talks about that when he discusses the relationship between hawks and pigeons. And that kind of encapsulates the natural or primitive order of things. Conversely, you have civilized order, which is based around the rule of written law. There's transparency, there's accountability and equity. And this is achieved by truth. At least that is the statement of the film, I think. And so you have the police, you have the church, these pillars of societal stability, and they're trying to compel Terry to tell the truth. And so is Edie. She's a morally upright woman who is trying to do right by her dead brother, whose death is the inciting incident of the film. And she's looking
Mm-hmm.
for truth, and she's willing to risk it all to get it. And ultimately, I think the movie is saying that the truth is a very sacred thing. It's a tenet of civilization, and that is a very noble sentiment, which I appreciate. But I also can't help be somewhat cynical towards when you think about it as like we talked about, is kind of a defense for selling out your friends.
Well, his brother too, like in this sense, it's like it's literally family in this case. But I love how you're talking about truth and silence here, because that's exactly what like these performances lean into. I mentioned earlier about like sort of the realism of the film, and Kazan actually used real people as extras. Like, he didn't cast all actors. It's like these guys have like, it's like their life written on their faces. Just, they look like these authentic. They look like dock workers. You
Yeah.
know, um, during the shoot, they shot everything outside in the dead of winter, and it's like, the people in front of the camera, you know, look the same as the people behind the camera. The crew, everybody's sort of together in this freezing cold
Mm.
exteriors, and they're just it all adds to this authenticity, and then you got the principal performances, lean into this, Stellar Adler, Stanislavski method style of acting, as I mentioned earlier. um, you know in the present, they're reacting to the now. And compare this to what we were talking about last week, Casablanca, where it's like the banter between Rick and Louie. It's like, they're quick talking and they're doing this and they're, hey, what's happening
Hmm.
here? The whatever. And that's like the golden age of Hollywood. Like, but it's apparent when you watch, especially watch these movies back to back. No one is that quick witted. Nobody can talk like that. Like,
That's right.
people in real life, we stumble, we mumble, we make mistakes. And I don't know if that's like, and that's Brando. It's so great for this, because it's not because he just mumbles when he talks, like, notoriously, but it feels real. And Kazan gives him kind of the time to flub words and stumble, and we kind of see it play out on screen. Like, take for example the scene in the park, where Terry and Edie are walking and she drops the glove,
Mm.
and it seemingly is an innocent mistake, and it's almost like it's improv, but then we become captivated by him playing with the glove, and he's sort
That's
of
right.
running it through his fingers, and he's saying his line, and I'm just watching it. I'm just like, all I can do is watch him with this glove. It's like enthralling. Even one point putting it on as he's kind of swinging in the swing, and then he finally sort of gives it back to her, and you're like, wow, that seems so like they just caught that. But it's like that was all choreographed. Like that probably happened. Not even probably. I think it did happen in a rehearsal where she dropped the glove, and they're like, "Oh, let's use that."
Yeah.
So let's like live in this moment, and then it becomes a choreographed, um, authentic reaction, though.
Yeah, I love that they, as you say, Kazan allows things to sort of play out, and a little thing like that, you don't just throw it away, like, like use it, roll with it, and that does bring
Yeah.
a real sense of truth to the performances. And there's also a consideration of perspective in truth that the movie, I think,
Mm-hmm.
looks at in its exploration of the concept. And for much of the movie, Terry is resistant to the idea of giving testimony because he doesn't want to be a rat.
Right.
And then at the end, when he confronts Johnny and his goons, he says very pointedly, Johnny, I'm standing over here now. I'm standing here. His perspective has changed. He is literally seeing things from the other side now, and obviously figuratively as well. And you know, I think one man's rat is another man's hero, and
Mm.
so you do get this sort of this acknowledgement of the film that it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi said, many of our truths depend greatly on our own point of view. And again, this sort of feels like a statement from Kazan that he would very much like people to to understand his perspective, I guess, on truth.
Yeah, it does certainly sound. It feels very pointed, and that's sort of like as we were talking about the allegorical nature of the film. I also think it's important to note too that if you go back and look at the versions of the scripts, because there's been a ton of kind of scripts over time with this, and the actual him testifying against the mob was something that was put in at the very end,
Hmm.
because this original idea for the film came from Arthur Miller, and he had written a play called The Hook, which took place at, I think it's called Red Hook, like the borough of Red Hook in like New York, so like essentially on the water there. Um, and um, and yeah, they brought it to producers and stuff, and the producers wanted to make a bunch of changes, and Arthur Miller was like, "No, I'm not doing this," and he kind of pulled it. Miller and Kazan at the time. And then Kazan sort of went to Bud Schulberg, who had been working on sort of his own script of a similar idea, and they sort of like merged their ideas. But yeah, it wasn't until sort of later on in the script process that this testimony scene had been put in. But it does seem sort of fitting that that our hero is who is, I guess, a rat, but lack of a better term, has similar traits to the director of the film.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. The Is he a rat? Is he a hero? I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
debatable. I guess again, it depends on your perspective. And that use of rat though throughout is pretty interesting. There's a lot of
Yeah,
dehumanizing
yeah,
language in the film, and it seems like there's actually an unending list of animals which can describe an informant: a rat, a canary, a pigeon. There's probably some kind of treacherous
yeah,
fish that people use as well that we're not aware of. I don't know, but there's a tendency as well to call mobsters animals. We see that in Scorsese's movies. I think we see that here as well. And Father Pete even refers to the waterfront as a jungle. So there's this ecosystem that's being
mm-hmm.
described, and so we get this division of society along lines of civility. And that really reminded me of Raging Bull. The dehumanization of Jake LaMotta was a really strong theme in that. And
Yeah,
I think, Scorsese, you know, he definitely he seems to be inspired, in that sense of the movie, and also this matter of perspective. Because you remember the quote at the end of Raging Bull, it talked about there's the biblical quote and the idea of perspective in
yeah,
filmmaking. Yeah, you can definitely see just the through line and how much was taken here by Scorsese and how inspired he was, and Yeah, it's
Yeah,
clear, just like so much carried through, and meant a
it,
lot to a generation of filmmakers.
yeah, it did. I also like, you mentioned the rat, a canary, a pigeon. I also love that he calls the word, using the word mug to drive to describe
It's-
it. You're no good, dirty mug. Like, like it's just like such a great insult,
yeah.
mug. But it's like I'm glad we mentioned it earlier about you just mentioned Raging Bull, and we talked about that famous line in our episode on Raging Bull about I could have been a contender, I could have been somebody, and man, but that scene in itself is just, it's so incredible. And it's so interesting that Scorsese chose that one scene to sort of quote in Raging Bull, but how that scene plays out, and throughout history, people look to that scene. I could have been contender. It's like one of the best quotes, in I don't know if it was an AFI list or what specifically, but it was like the top three quotes ever in a film. That
hmm
line that Brando has. But Kazan, like, he just kind of he's quoted as saying that he just sat back and let two amazing actors work. But that moment is really amazing to watch, and it really takes a great director to see and understand what's happening in the moment, to give these actors the ability to kind of like live in the moment and go with what they're going with, and give it time to breathe. And again, it's the choices that Brando makes in that moment, and his brother Charlie, Steiger
Yeah,
is
Steiger,
Rob
Steger, huh?
Steiger.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he raises the gun, and he's gotten to the point where he's raising the gun, and it's like Brando chooses not to like jump back or get angry or resentment. It's just like, it's almost like this choice of disappointment. And
Yeah.
he slowly raises his hand and pushes, and he says, Charlie, and he pushes the gun down, and but then because Brando needs a dance partner in this. He needs somebody that's gonna equal him, right? And it's
Mm.
Steiger's like reaction is not to like look at him and just go, oh, I'm defeated or whatever. And he goes, like, looks up, and he's like staring at the roof of the car for what seems like an eternity. And Terry's disarmed him both emotionally and physically with the gun. But
Mm.
Charlie also, you also get the sense that like Charlie knows in that moment it's over for him. Like, he knows he's dead because he can't go against his brother. Like, he as much as he's through their dialogue, he's sort of saying, okay, like, get out of here, do whatever, but like, he knows it's over for him.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, man, like absolutely powerful, and yet also just really, I, I don't know. It's sort of like they almost underplay it. You know what I mean? Like you say, they do
Mm-hmm.
not lean in and try to heighten that emotion of that scene in any way. They really just they let things flow in a very organic way, and it's all very
Yeah.
subtle, and not overly performative as it easily could have been. There's you said at the start of the show, I was the Father Pete to your Terry Malloy, and Father Pete is pretty pivotal in this. And the movie is actually, like, I mean, there are some pretty heavy Christian overtones in this film. And the very beginning, well, we don't see it, but we just hear about it. It's related to us through the film, and it's Terry throwing the fight early in his life. When he talks, like,
Yeah.
we hear about it through this contender scene where he could have been somebody, but his brother came to him and said, it's not your night. And he was being compelled by the mob to throw the fight. And that sacrifice of truth is kind of like Terry's original sin. He is not truthful in the ring, and that is kind of what had, like, that is why he is where he is. It cost him his chance to be somebody, and if he had been truthful in the ring, everything might be different now. So taking a dive was his original sin, and now he's been kind of banished from paradise, and it's truth that redeems him. It's now coming forward, speaking out, being a whistleblower. That is kind of his way back into paradise. And yeah, that was an interesting sort of thing I found. And I found that these sort of the Christian themes of the movie and the presence of Father Pete to be, I don't know, very, I don't know, it could have been heavy handed, but I thought it was pretty well done, and it didn't feel like it was preaching to me, but just sort of like, yeah, this is how it would be. Like the church would be a strong influence here. Like the priest would be, kind
Yeah.
of this figure, this sanguine figure to guys in that position. And yeah, I really enjoyed. I thought like actually Father Pete, I think, and the whole his contribution was one of my favorite parts of the film.
Yeah, and like, the chain smoking father, like, he's smoking darts the whole time, and
And who
he punches Terry at
that's
one
right.
point, and it's
That's
like,
right.
man, he's like, he's such an interesting character. And the you mentioned this sort of Christian undertones of the film and stuff. It's like you said, I think it's pretty pointed at the and at the end, when he gets kind of, the whole gang beats him up, and then he rises, so to speak, and like leads this slew of men, into work, or like, he's almost rising from the dead sort of thing. He's almost like this Christ figure at that point,
100%.
it's,
100% he is.
um, and Edie and father are kind of locking in arms and sort of smiling at each other and looking at him. And it's like, but it is there, and it's very present throughout the film. And even like, Edie is with the sisters, and
Hmm.
she's kind of comes down, and there's all these sort of like you said, nods to him. Um,
Yeah,
but man,
the
there's
idea of
so
crucifixion comes up a lot. Sorry, I just want to jump in real quick on the
yeah, yeah,
continuation of that
yeah.
idea. For the father brings it up, and you sort of see it throughout that this like they talk about. He was talking about Christ, like the crucifixion didn't just take place, in the moment of crucifixion. There was more to it. There was,
Yes.
and he talks about that. And someone has to step forward, and someone has to suffer, and really sort of see this thing through to its unfortunate end in order for there to be salvation. So yeah, he is a Christ figure, and he is someone who steps up and leads people. And the light of Christ is another thing, phrase that you hear, like, so like truth and light and Christendom and all, it's like that's sort of, it's all sort of packaged together,
Yeah.
and it really does sort of contribute to the overall theme of the power of truth in the film. And yeah, I thought that was yeah, the whole the yeah, that scene too, like you said, where he's leading the men, very reminiscent of
Yeah.
Jesus and the apostles, or anytime when Jesus would proselytize. And at the end, they walk through that garage door gate, and the gate closes behind them, and it all has a
Yeah.
very kind of, yeah, heavenly biblical kind of feel to it. It's pretty interesting.
It does. Before we wrap up here and decide if On the Waterfront is a hell of a picture, yeah, there's so much more we can talk about with this film. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. There's but I do want to, just the I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the settings of the film, like everything it is on the waterfront. There's these there's like there's a texture to the like the bar, like you can feel it, and like on the restaurant, like the walls, and like the when they're the wedding scene, where there's sort of like there's this just this physicalness to what we're the setting, and then the photography of the film. It's just this photographer, Boris Kaufman, who I think he got his start in Europe. This had been like his first sort of major American film. And um, him and Kazan was actually a bit like reluctant to have him on board. He had sort of done second unit stuff on, I think, East of Eden, or another one of his films, but he sort of was like, oh, okay, like I'll bring him on board. And they worked so well together. Just the lighting of the film, there's like noir aspects to it, the
Mm.
shadows, but like then stuff on the rooftop is just like really amazing. um so yeah, it really felt uh like the photography was just incredible on the film. So I just want to mention that
Yeah, well,
before we
one
close.
shot that really stood out to me, just on the subject of the DP, when Terry is walking away after Charlie is dead, they find his body in the alleyway, and he's walking down the
Oh yeah.
alleyway, and there's like that sort of diagonal bisecting of the alley with light and dark, and he's moving out of the
Yes.
dark and into the light is just, man, I looked at that, I was like, whoa, that's beautiful. That's really pretty.
That's such a great, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's like one of the scenes that, like, it's just had the timing of that and how they did it. It's like with even with the truck coming down and how they wanted to reveal the body. It's kind of hanging there, the truck going by, them running down the alley, kind of
Mm,
in and out of the shadows. It's just brilliantly lit. And but then, like you said, how it's choreographed and the direction of it and how it's revealed, the body is just so cool too. The car just driving and you just get this angle. Yeah, man, it's just such a they complement each other so well, Kazan and Kaufman. So
mm,
yeah, that was really awesome. But
yeah,
yeah,
truly.
so to clue, I want to know, you had a resounding hell of a picture for Casablanca last week. What's your final call on the Waterfront?
Yeah, less resounding, I would say. I felt about this similarly to how I felt about Raging Bull, in that I'm watching it, I'm enthralled, I can see that it is great. I cannot dispute the
Yeah.
greatness, but I did not find myself charmed in the way I was with Casablanca. Um, I don't necessarily think I will hurry back to watch this, or make it like a routine watch,
Mm-hmm.
in the way I feel I will with Casablanca, but undeniably great for a lot of reasons, and I was really glad today to hear your perspective on the acting and how that kind of changed things, because watching this, I remember thinking, I was like, was this the first time people sort of, this felt new, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
in that time, like I said, it wasn't as performative as acting sort of had a tendency to be back then, and so the nuance of it, the subtle approach, the realism, that felt really important. And so yeah, for all of those reasons and more, yes, it is a hell of a picture, but you know, do I am I going to go back and watch it right away? Nah, probably not. But yeah, definitely a very worthy hell of a picture, and worthy Oscar winner.
Yeah. Like you're on your hierarchy of hell of a pictures, it's pretty low down there, but that doesn't mean that it's not a hell of a picture for you.
Yeah, or just like it would be qualified in the sense that like again, it's like Dave Matthews Band. I hate it, but I know that they're good musicians. You know what I mean? Like, man, like, to hell with those guys. Like, if anyone puts it on, I'm leaving the room. But I recognize the musicianship. But no, I enjoyed this movie. I don't love it, in a deep way, but you cannot deny its greatness. So
On the Waterfront, the Dave Matthews of films.
correct.
I love it. I agree with it, sort of everything you say. This film holds kind of a dear place with me, and just the acting in it. You know, and for anybody that doesn't know, I was pursued acting on a level of, like, oh, I want to move away. I'm going to move and become an actor, and it's going to be this big thing, and it's going to be easy and whatever. So, which it wasn't, and I haven't acted in years now. But I was pursuing it for a while, so it was like I was reading lots of acting books and studying a lot, and I studied this film and in film school, and just while I was kind of pursuing acting, and just like this whole style of what it was and what it kind of led to in American film, especially, it was really revolutionary. And it's pretty incredible, the performances, and that's why I revisit this every few years, and it's still, every time I watch it, I sort of grab something new from it. So yeah, hell of a picture for me as well. And I'm so glad we got to kind of talk a little bit more about it, or talk about it, and sort of like realizing that there's all these through lines to, like, our other hell of a pictures
Yeah.
episodes we've talked about. Like you said, obviously, clearly the Scorsese's, Casablanca, but then, like I was mentioning to you before we recorded, that it was like even the Oppenheimer, the
Yes.
idea of the communist stuff, and, like, that's not very pointed in this film, that the subject matter, but sort of what's surrounding it, like the subject
Yes.
matter of Oppenheimer and the timing. And yeah, so it's very clear its influence and how it was how it's still talked about today. So On the Waterfront, another hell of a picture. And that leads us to next week, which again, continuing this best picture run, we're jumping into the 60s. We got a lot to choose from. This was a more difficult choice for us in what we wanted to do. So David, do you want to fill everybody in on what we're doing next week on Hell of a Picture?
Well, I might actually pass this one back to you because I'm sort of getting muddy on the decades. I think I know what it is, but I think you have the master list, so I will cede the floor
I do
to
have
you.
the master list.
Yes.
Yes. So next week, this was the when we were making up our master list, this was the one that you were adamant that we did.
Oh yes, yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, I was about to say, because when you said there was some debate, I was like, I was not debating.
Sorry, I
actually put my foot down and said this is the movie we're doing, no doubt about it. I banged the table for this one. So
sorry, yeah, I apologize because I had screwed up our masters. I was jumping ahead to the 70s.
Yes, that was the tumultuous, highly contentious decade. Yeah.
Yeah, so stay tuned to next week till we reveal that. But this week, for next week, we're going to be doing Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes, we are. Absolutely.
So Dave, this is a banger for you. This is what you were very adamant about.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Man, why? I mean, for a number of reasons. I remember the first time I saw this. It was with my dad, and I was pretty young. And I think this was the movie that made me realize old movies can be awesome. You know what I mean? Like you have this sort of this misconception about older films, and this is the one that sort of illuminated me to the idea that no, they can be totally awesome, and
nice.
I love it for that reason. I love the history of this too. Like T.E. Lawrence as a historical figure is every bit as interesting and more than the movie about his life. Like you could not sensationalize this guy more than he already is sensational, I think. And so I'm fascinated by the subject matter. I love the film. It is, the favorite film of a lot of great directors. I think Spielberg puts this number one on his list.
Yeah.
You've got to think that it's influenced a lot of people just in its scale, its ambition, the beauty of it. It's incredible. So I'm really looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, this is one that I'm not, I mean, I've seen it years and years and years ago. Like, I don't think I've rewatched this since I was probably a teenager. So, it's sort of like a lot of these films we're doing, like, it's sort of in the culture, like just understanding it and hearing about it and sort of like, understanding its significance, but it'll be fun to kind of deep dive and talk about it in kind of this historical context. And this is a fast Fred one. This is one for your dad, man. So
absolutely shout out to Dad.
Shout out Dave's dad, for showing him Lawrence of Arabia, and we're going to get into it next week.
Yeah, all right. So he introduced me to a few classics. I can remember Gallipoli as well as a big early moment in film study for me. So yeah, shout out
Gallipoli.
Dad.
Yeah. My old man, maybe I'll save that for another day. I was going to tell, it's like, yeah, I think our parents sort of introduced us to lots of great films, but
certainly,
yeah, we'll get into that at some point. So for David Hollinshurst, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and this has been another rip-roaring episode of Hell of a Picture.